I'm an entrepreneur and a practical type. For me, the problem I was trying to solve for 7 years was that we weren't creating enough new businesses and entrepreneurship and business growth and job growth in communities around the country. And then I realized that the problems were much bigger and deeper. But certainly, Andrew Yang in his late 20s was not thinking any of this. Andrew Yang in his late 20s was just, trying to get a date.
I think what's interesting and what captured so much interest about your candidacy and more was you talk about it in terms of the fourth industrial revolution. Obviously, I've interviewed you in the past and you obviously understand some of the deeper, obviously you did the math, but you also spoke about it in a very visceral way. So when you were traveling those places and you're talking to these people, how did it come through like in their stories? Because something that I've always kind of come to understand is that elite economists and many others will try to explain phenomena away by being like, no, your job is gone, but you're better off because of X. And that when you actually talk to real voters and people who have been affected by automation, trade policy, or loss of manufacturing, they know exactly why they lost their job and the macro force that it kind of brought about. So is that something that you saw like whenever you were traveling?
Yeah, they did know what happened, particularly in a place like Detroit, where the urban center emptied out for the most part and the population drained away. And they know that it was a combination of globalization and trade deals and offshoring and also the automation of many of their traditional manufacturing jobs. So they know. And I studied economics, so I understand the theory behind it. Comparative advantage, you'll be fine, or you'll learn how to do something that's higher value add. But then you go there and that stuff just seems farcical. You go there.
Right.
And there was a disconnect that I struggled with, and then Trump won in 2016. I started Venture for America in 2011. So I'd been doing that work for 5 years, and then Trump wins. And then I'm like, okay, this is much deeper and nastier. And we're still not being honest about it somehow. So that was what drove me. But I am very interested in trying to figure out the genesis of my approach, in part because I've been an operator and entrepreneur for 20 years or so, and they're just like facts on the ground that you have to deal with. And if you tell yourself a nonsense story and you're running a private company, you're going to fail.
Yes, right.
Like it's inevitable. And so, I like to think I just traffic in as close a version to reality as I can find, because if you're operating from reality, then you're more likely to be successful. And one of the frustrations I found, Saagar, is that there's not a whole lot of trafficking in reality that's going on right now. And it's going to destroy us because we have this increasingly inchoate set of arguments. And one thing that someone said to me, it was Lawrence Lessig, who said to me that we live in a vetocracy right now where I can't get anything done, but I can keep you from getting anything done.
Right.
And so there's a lot of negative power going on. And we're in an era of unprecedented change. And so if you freeze government and say no one can get anything done, then you wind up with problems that just get bigger and bigger, and you become more and more behind the curve and out of date.
I think that's a really profound point that you're making there, Andrew, because the main thing that you're observing is that we can stop things from other getting done. And like I was saying, I generally find the whole shtick about businessmen trying to run the country that way as pretty hokey, because it's like, well, no, actually, like a nation state is not a business and all that. But the one thing where I think it absolutely does apply is, to your point, is that if you do something which is totally delusional, your business should fail. Like, there should be at least some sort of incentive. Theoretically, that's in democracy. Like, voters should vote you out if you do fail. And yet, we've kind of come to a system where you have both parties which are invested very much in an ideology which has failed. The fourth industrial revolution, as you call it, didn't really just occur out of nowhere. One of the most pernicious things that somebody told me, I won't name him because he's high level in economics, but he said, I'm unconvinced that the best scenario for Amazon is not 10% unemployment or, perma 10 to 15% unemployment. And the reason being that if you're in a rural or a small town, that the best paying job, so to speak, and really the only option for you is to work in an Amazon warehouse at a very set wage which is non-unionized. And there is a level of, corporate control there over the way that you're conducting your life and your, your singular option of being able to live that I do think is unacceptable. How have you always looked at the monopolization question? Because I know you toyed with it, between tech and then the regular sector too.
I don't think we have truly reckoned with what it means to have trillion-dollar companies that dominate so much of our waking life. And it was, to me, a source of great amusement watching these trillion-dollar companies pretend to be scrappy startups in front of Congress the other week. It was like, we're not number one at all. We could be upended any day by those TikTokers or whatever. It's like, we wouldn't have crushed Instagram. No, it's like the whole thing. It's like, oh, gosh, like watching them try and recast themselves. That the consequences of having companies of that scale are unknown to us, but they're extreme. And one of the things I kept saying to folks is like, look, at this point, Amazon no longer has to obey the rules of business physics anymore. It's just like this voracious black hole.
Yes. Literally,
it's like it could decide not to make money in a given quarter and it would still be a $1 trillion company. You can't compete with them in any meaningful way. They have essentially unlimited resources and access to more data than anyone else. They'll trumpet the fact that they're hiring tens of thousands of Americans while retail is shutting down. And I made light of it earlier about what's going to happen. And so the old toolkit would be like, well, break them up. And I think that there needs to be a breakup of some of these companies in some verticals. But I also don't think that actually solves the problem, because you wind up with still these network effects that just advantage whatever company is at the hub. And right now our government is so bad at this, where we're essentially 25 years behind the curve. So any company that's come into existence over the last 25 years, we're like, don't know what you're doing. And then we have this mistrust of government being like, well, you're slow and behind the times, and they're really smart and ahead of the times. They should decide what to do. Mm-hmm. And that's been one of the ways we're conditioned. So the optimal path would be that we go to each of the big 4 or 5 companies and just say, look, we have company specific issues with you. Trying to apply a one size fits all antitrust framework doesn't even make sense.
Right.
We're going to have to craft tailored legislation and figure out what the worst aspects of your enormity are, and then circumscribe them. So in Facebook's case, it might be like, well, what are our biggest beefs with you? The erosion or near decimation of our democracy, I would say, would be the top of the list. Mm-hmm. And then the fact that they sell and resell us and our data for tens of billions of dollars a year might be second. And then the third might be the fact that they have a near monopoly on certain types of social media because they did buy Instagram and WhatsApp. And so maybe we have to do something about that. And then there might be mental health of our kids associated with Instagram use. You go down the list and just try and figure out what each issue is. I'm not against size for size's sake. I'm against size if it ends up hurting us in various ways. And then you'd have to write company-specific legislation for Facebook. Essentially, don't pretend it's like we're going to take out a 20th century framework before the internet even existed, back when they were talking about, picking like, this company makes too much steel. Right. It's a very, very different world now.
Yeah, I think it's funny you said that. What I always loved about your campaign was the feeling that I wasn't living in ossified Washington. Because I've covered these guys on Capitol Hill and so much more, and it was, I'll never forget him being like, "Why does my iPhone listen to me?" And I was like, all right. Like when you're going up to Mark Zuckerberg and you're asking, how does Facebook make money? It's like, okay, I mean, you just waste, you have a finite amount of time whenever you get to ask questions here. It used to drive me absolutely nuts.
Thank you for listening in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, please do subscribe to Yang Speaks and click on notifications so we can let you know every time we have a new episode.